Hi everyone, welcome to this latest episode of VFX Notes. I'm Ian Fales from Befores and Afters, and I'm here with Hugo Guerra from Hugo's Desk. Hi Hugo.
Hi everyone.
Great to see you, Hugo. Today is a really cool special episode where we actually have a guest, and that is Matt from the Foundry. Hi Matt, how's things?
Hey, everything's great.
It's great to have you on. We're going to be talking about something really cool the Foundry's doing with Unreal Reader, and we'll get to that in a minute. But I thought, Matt, I'd get you first to introduce yourself, what your current role is at Foundry, and your sort of history in the industry.
Sure, yeah. So first of all, it's a great pleasure. I love the podcast, and you guys are both respectively awesome in your own rights. So thanks for having me here. So I'm Matt Mazerolle. I'm the director of product for new technology at Foundry. That's kind of a fancy way of talking about my role, which really is about taking the work we do in our research team and helping to figure out the best way of bringing that into the hands of artists who use Foundry products. So, Foundry traditionally has a very strong culture of doing pure research and development and experimenting with new things. We don't always succeed, but we try many different things, and we've tried many different things over our history, playing with new technologies and launching various projects. We've launched projects in cloud, virtual reality, things around real time, and what I find really exciting about my role is I get to work with these really talented and awesome developers who are pushing the boundaries of new trends and technology or new possibilities, and try to figure out how do we build prototypes and how do we get those to a point where we can test them with actual users and test them in the marketplace and figure out how do we put those into products so that people can actually buy them and use them. So that's really fun, and so that's what I do.
What about what have you been up to before that, Matt, as well? Why don't you give us like a little bit of rundown of like your experience in the industry, what you've been up before? Because I know you have a lot of connection with the video games industry as well. So yeah, give us a little bit about that.
Yeah, my niche isn't necessarily in VFX. It's actually a little bit of a. I always feel a little bit of imposter syndrome working at Foundry, especially talking to folks like yourselves who are experts at.
Oh, don't worry, I have the same. Don't worry.
I'm not an expert. Definitely not an expert.
Oh no, none of us are. We just pretend really well, Matt. It's
I always tell people my career has been essentially built around the obsession I had when I was around 7 or 8 years old, when I decided that I wanted to make video games, and that was it. I didn't want to be a cowboy or an astronaut. It was like making video games was the thing. So I did the usual things people did back then, which, for anyone listening, don't walk in my footsteps. But I dropped out of university to go and find a job in the game industry. And essentially I got in with a demo that I wrote. And this is, back in the days when like a demo was like a handwritten, piece of assembly code. So I wrote this really cool 3D texture mapping thing, which was like, in 3D meant like ramming pixels into a video buffer with all kinds of, math. So I got my first job in the game industry, and the first company I worked at ended up folding, and I ended up going back to Montreal, and that's when I sort of dipped, my other toe into the visual effects side for the first time, where I ended up at Softimage back when it was actually still part of Microsoft. I actually worked for Microsoft for, I think, 2 paychecks, and before they were sold to Avid. So I'm technically, among my many credentials, I'm a Microsoft alumni. And I was on this great project called Sumatra, which became Softimage XSI for all you people.
Oh my God! Don't start me on that, man. Don't start me on XSI and on Softimage, because we miss it so much. Like, we used to use it so much on production. I still did cinematics even like 4 years ago with it, although it was not even supported anymore. Amazing piece of software. Yeah, it's fortunately it's gone forever.
Yeah, you shouldn't say that, Hugo, because that's contraband, and Autodesk will need to come and seize your license of XSI.
Yeah,
Nice.
It doesn't work anymore though. Like, not anymore.
Yeah. But that was really, really fun times. I think I was 19 or 20 at the time, really young. and my two bosses were kind of the architects of the Sumatra system, and they ended up quitting shortly after I joined. And they basically said, "Look, they're gonna pin all this on you and some other guy, so get ready." So sure enough, I ended up working on Sumatra until we released it as XSI 1.0. My boss's boss at the time was this nice man named Mark Petit, who now heads up at Epic. So it's funny, everything comes full circle. And yeah, exactly. Never burn a bridge in the industry, if I'm going to be throwing out advice on the podcast.
Or burn so many bridges that you become infamous for it. That's the other way around. I'm joking.
But yeah, no, I actually left Softimage because I wanted to make video games. I really enjoyed working on tools, but I had that itch to actually create games, and ended up going to California to work on games, and realized that we were actually making games. It was really like a total mess. We were making games in the mid 90s. Forget about it. It was really just cowboys, and they were just doing crazy things. And my office mate and I, we got really into how we would make games better, and really software development process and all that. We said, and he was from Quebec, and we're like, you know what we should do? We should take all of our cash from California. We should go back to Montreal and start a game company. And they'll love us because we're going to bring all of this great. That's exactly what we did, and we failed spectacularly. But I ended up starting my own game business, which was cool. I ran that for a couple of years in my mid-20s, and then I was broke. And the next stage of my career was a dinner that I had gotten invited to because my ex-girlfriend knew somebody at Ubisoft by the name of Jade Raymond. And she was this lady from Sony who had been hired by Ubisoft to create this really cool game. And she was looking for someone to lead up the engineering team for this. And so I ended up going to the studio and looking at the fake footage, which is basically like a cinematic before you make the game. And I looked at this thing. This was the fake footage for Assassin's Creed. So if you don't know Jade Raymond, she's often in the video game news, and she started a new studio and everything now. She kind of showed me this fake footage. I was like, this game, it's impossible to make. You'll never be able to make this thing with a dude climbing over walls and assassinating people in escape. I was like, it's ridiculous. Sign me up. Where do I how do I become a part of this? And it was the ex-Prince of Persia team. So if any of you guys played the original Pop, that game was just crazy. And so I ended up doing that. We worked on Assassin's Creed. We were building a game engine and a game at the same time, which was a really big challenge. I mean, we ramped up to, started the core team of 25 people and ramped up.
Don't tell me you've worked in Anvil then. You've worked on the engine on Anvil then.
The original Anvil source code, yeah.
Oh my God.
From the very beginning with the core team, yeah. Very, very early days. They had actually been working on the engine for quite some time since they left Pop, but they had kind of gotten into the mode of okay, we're going to make a game now. And one of the things that team had requested was we need somebody to lead the engineering for the game, because they really want to focus on the engine and the technology. So I had actually been interviewed on that thing by this group of, I think it was 7 or 8 people who were the core Prince of Persia team and the top, basically the top engineering guys at Ubisoft. And I remember these guys had been going to lunch together for years. They were best buddies. And I had to kind of pass this smell test of because they wanted me to kind of lead the team for the game. So it was really great. I mean, just that team was so high caliber. The game was, we all, I thought it was,
Well, I mean, now I don't know how many it is, but 16 or 17 games later, it's one of the biggest franchises in the world. Still using Anvil though. As well, they still use it in production. We had a run with that engine as well at Fire.Smoke when I was doing cinematics. When I was directing cinematics for them over there, we had the engine at the office so that we could do the cinematics for Assassin's Creed Syndicate at the time. Very difficult engine to kind of get our head around it. It was not very user friendly at the time, but that's just because we were not the game developers. We couldn't really get our way around it. But we've managed to get the cinematics out of it. But it was a very powerful engine. It still is,
Getting productivity out of the nascent technology, like balancing the power and the productivity, was a huge challenge. And that's a theme that is still there today with game engines. Just coming to this virtual production in Unreal and all of this excitement. I mean, you have to throw a lot of your assumptions of what it means to use a creative tool out the window when you pick up something like a game engine. It's getting better and better, and I'm actually really amazed at all the progress that things like Unreal Editor have made over the years. But I mean, in Anvil in the early days, if you said "Hey, I'd like an undo function," you'd be laughed out of the room, and they'd never talk to you again. Can you imagine wanting an undo function? Come on, there's no way. But I imagine it's there now, right? Years later, but that wasn't the priority at the time.
No, of course not.
Wow. Oh, and Matt, how did that sort of end up leading you to Foundry?
Yeah, so there's a couple more hoops I had to jump through. After Assassin's Creed, a lot of folks wanted to work on the sequels, and they were spinning up, 2 sequels at the same time and doubling down on the franchise, which is, everyone can see is really, really paid off for Ubisoft. But I really wasn't interested in that. I wanted to do something completely radical. And I ended up getting a call from this person named Kim Libreri, who was at Digital Domain at the time. And he had started this really crazy project where he had just finished Speed Racer and wanted to he believed that film and game technology was going to converge, and that you'd be able to render an entire movie at cinematic quality using real-time tech. The idea wasn't that you would render at 60 frames a second, but that you could get filmic renders at maybe a few frames a second, or something way faster than what a typical offline render was, with pretty much the same quality. And you could sort of organically dial that down from at 10 all the way down to 1 or 2 if you were doing, let's say, layout or lighting or something like that. So it just really improved the workflow. And so he had this vision that this was where everything was going. And coming off Assassin's Creed, I was really excited by this. And I remember flying to LA and going into DD for the interview. And the first thing that happened was one of the people on Kim's team handed me a copy of Assassin's Creed and said, "Could you please sign this before you start the interview?" It's wait a minute. I'm like, are they treating me like some kind of rock star just because I shipped a video game? But yes, that's what we did. We this was 2008. It was really exciting. I had kind of 2 bosses. I had Cliff Plumer, who was on one side, and Kim on the other side doing the video game stuff. DD was also trying, they had a big investment from Michael Bay, and we were trying to figure out ways of making video games and also these movies and looking at tie-ins. So I got to do all these really cool things. I got to fly to Frankfurt and do an analysis on the Crytek engine. I got to do deep dives into Unreal Engine at the time, and just they had me looking at technology, helping to develop this new stuff in the team. It was really cool. I got to work with Kim, who is just an absolute force of nature. Really, really awesome stuff. Lots of really, really smart people there. And some of them who I still have the pleasure of interacting with professionally today. And Kim, of course, is also at Epic. So again, burn your bridges.
Matt,
then the 2000.
Matt, can I ask you?
Yeah.
Absolutely. Can I ask you? Did you work on that Thundercats demo that DD did?
That's me. Yeah, that's with myself and Mo and Leo and Olivier Ozu and a bunch of other folks. Yeah.
Cool.
I'm forgetting all the names, but yeah, some really, really talented people on that thing.
I love that demo. I think that showed a lot of promise, but maybe was a couple of years too early. I mean, we don't have to talk too much about it, but
yeah,
I think
maybe you can't.
It was waiting for. I think we're still maybe a little short of it even now in 2021.
Yeah.
What didn't help though that year was obviously the financial crisis, and that sort of pulled the rug out from under a lot of these projects. I mean, at that time, this Thundercats project, we were in what we called the cooler, which was essentially like a cubicle up on stilts, in the middle of a sound stage. So we would go to work, we would climb these metal stairs and go into this essentially a, human-sized cooler, and then with all these little cubicles, right? So, we couldn't afford these luxuries when the financial crisis hit, and they couldn't have this random Canadian laying around. But then what ended up happening is right at that time, Softimage got sold to Autodesk. And at that time, Marc Petit had been running Autodesk's Media Entertainment division. And my former boss, Mark Stevens, and my former boss's boss, Marc Petit, phoned me up and said, "Hey, there's this merger going to happen, and one of the things that is really going to make this thing work is we really want to start moving into video game workflows. Like we really think the content creation tools being sort of this export throw over the wall thing isn't really the long term." And we think you kind of really understand how to, make that link. Do you have any ideas? So I think I talked their ears off with all my ideas about like backflow, the game engine talks to the tool, and you need to have a data model, and everything needs to go over a wire. And they're like, okay, great. So you're going to be the product manager for game technology for this new thing. And I was like, cool. What's a product manager? So I joined Autodesk, and I learned from some way smarter people than myself. Like one of my mentors was Chris Viano and some other folks there who really taught me how to, look at a technology initiative as something that you ultimately have to drive against market requirements and things that people, like problems that people want to solve. And the better you define those problems, the better you can build technology that, gets the job done and not really waste too much time throwing stuff out. So that was really cool. I did that for a few years, but things got a little wobbly. I don't know if you guys remember, Autodesk bought a game engine. We bought a bunch of middleware companies, but there's a lot of changes of management, and I don't think it really stuck. And I got kind of frustrated, and I ended up getting this job offer at Electronic Arts, where I can't even remember how I interviewed for that. I think some guy accosted me at GDC and said, Electronic Arts is going to deploy the Frostbite game engine across the whole company. We're going from like 4 games to 18 games using this engine. You seem like the kind of person who, likes to go and herd technology cats. Would you like to move to Vancouver? Actually, the first offer was, would you like to move to Sweden and deploy Frostbite? I had a 2-year-old daughter at the time, and I was like, I don't think I can move to Sweden. They're like, well, can you swing Vancouver? So my wife, who also worked at Autodesk, was like, okay, she left Autodesk. I ended up moving to Sweden for 3 months and then moved to Vancouver. We moved the whole family to Vancouver. And we ended up trying to turn the Frostbite engine into a thing that was essentially just this really cool piece of tech that was mainly serving Battlefield into something that had like Plants vs. Zombies, Need for Speed, all this other stuff. And this like Splinter Cell that was moving it into FIFA, which was like the crown jewel, right? So really complicated thing. And I brought in, things like customer relation managers. So I actually brought in people who would like collect requirements from game teams and synthesize those and bring them to product managers in the engine team, and then help to build roadmaps and feed those back. Like things that the folks in Sweden had never really been used to doing, because they could just walk up to someone at DICE that was literally on the floor below them and tap them on the shoulder and talk to me about your problem. And like, okay, yeah, I'll add that to my to-do list, right? But you couldn't do that across, 9 time zones and 18 games. And again, EA was great, but the politics kind of got in the way. My boss ended up getting laid off, and there was like a changing of the guard. And my wife was working at Foundry. And she was like, look, you need to find a job. End up going to Amazon, and Amazon was this really big in Vancouver. I didn't really know anything.
Before you move on from Frostbite, I just wanted to mention. It really paid off, Matt, because now it is the only engine that they use on every single game. They did manage to develop that kind of pipeline, because I've talked with a lot of people that work there, and it was very difficult. It was very torturous development, but now they really managed to do that. Like the entire company is synchronized with one engine, which must really make everything much easier. I mean, obviously it brings difficulties as well if you're trying to make a game that was not set out for that engine. But it must help so much because you guys can just share things around between all the offices, isn't it? It must be so much more powerful.
Yeah, it's very difficult when you're developing games at scale, where you face kind of a fork in the road at some point, where you either go and buy off-the-shelf technology and focus on building a game and managing your external dependency on that technology. That's dependency on cost and support and everything else, versus building your own technology and basically living with all of the the consequences of that, which means you're basically becoming a software development company. You're no longer just a game company. You're also developing a sustainable and user-friendly and documented and the whole rigmarole of development. Very, very different approaches to game development. I think Epic has been very successful in particular because I think that, and Unity as well, but they've been very successful at balancing that. And they're very, very successful as software development companies. Everybody thinks of Epic in terms of Fortnite and those things, but I've always found the main strength of what they do really well is they do the software development side really well. Yeah. And I think that's what Electronic Arts really succeeded with the Frostbite team.
Yeah.
Making that transition from just a couple of games to being able to take their engine and deploy it to many, many teams and still be able to develop software in a way that doesn't drag them into every direction and have them implode was a really difficult transition for them to make. And they really did a good job. I don't think it was necessarily just because of me. They had to build a culture and they had to build a lot of competency, and the journey was a lot longer than my time there.
No, I'm sure you had a huge part on it, but the reason I stopped you and the reason I wanted to mention this is because I do think that there's a lot of misunderstanding of how these things operate. A lot of people kind of like look at Electronic Arts or look at their games and look at these engines and they think things are done right away. This is like a long development and a very long plan to get to where they are now. This probably started years and years ago. Ubisoft is also kind of doing a similar thing with their engine as well, with Snowdrop. Although they have not done the same, they have not implemented with all their games. They're still trying to do that, but I just wanted to mention this because a lot of people have this misunderstanding that things are much faster. The video games industry really depends on these kind of like really robust plans that take a long time in development to make these games engines work, So I think it's really interesting. That's why I wanted to mention,
the first game I worked on, the tools were basically a Lightwave plugin that I wrote to calculate a BSP. Like,
great.
That was it. That was the editor. And then roughly 2 years into that, we were building our own game engine. This was when there was no 3D accelerators. I think like Glide and 3DFX had just come out. Unreal version 1 hit. And the fact that you could see like a UI, like there was QBSP and stuff like that at the time. I don't know if you remember, like if you want to make a Quake level back in the day, you had this thing called QBSP that looked like it was an old DOS program.
Yeah.
But when the first Unreal editor came out, like version 1, I mean, it blew everyone away.
Yeah, and there was nothing like that. There was nothing like it at all, like on any level. And the game as well. The game looked stunning as well. The Unreal and then Unreal Tournament and all the things that they've done after that. But it was also like I remember when it came out, it was photoreal at the time, at least on our eyes, So,
right.
Yeah.
And you got to remember, we're talking more than 20 years ago. 25
yeah, it
years.
was like late 90s, wasn't it? That was when I can't remember the year when Unreal came out, but it must have been late 90s. I was still in university. I remember playing it at night with some of my friends, the first version of Unreal, the actual first game. I mean, so yeah.
Yeah, so if you want to make your own game engine and make it better than Unreal, you're going to need a time machine. Like there's a lot of work. I mean, the competency that goes into these things is really hard. If you look at the number of people who work on these technologies today, like there are vast amounts of people. If I was to start a game engine company today to compete with Unity or Epic, I don't think I could even hire the people. Like they have literally hired almost every single high-end 3D graphics programmer out there, and they're all working to build this stuff. I mean, if you're not working on some company that's trying to go after the metaverse, like there's very little left over for you to even like find manpower, right?
Yeah.
So
In fact,
it's very time.
they're employing so many people who originally worked in the visual effects industry
Yeah.
as well, aren't they, Matt? Because of that crossover, frankly, between game engines and filmmaking, which is really fascinating to me at the moment.
Yeah, absolutely. It's probably a good time as any to mention the Weta Digital acquisition, like that as well as like a really interesting move, because we're not used to seeing this cross pollination sort of played out in the out in the open like this. Very often, people will move quietly from video games to production, into making tools, kind of like I have in my career. But rarely do you see somebody go and throw, $1.6 billion of chips to like make an acquisition, right? But there's really good reasons for that. There's a big land grab happening right now around real-time technology, and the cloud aspect of that as well, I think, is something that not a lot of people are talking about. Is the way things are being done. Like these tools, going from a light wave importer to this UI for like a game editor was a giant gap. But for all of that to be like in the cloud and on demand, and everybody can just jam on a game or a movie or something across any boundary like we're interacting with right now is possibly the next stage that everyone's striving to reach. So
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting that you're mentioning that acquisition, which just happened like a couple of days ago. It's really interesting because I've always was fascinated, even when I've been on big studios, they develop so much in-house tools. They develop so much software, they develop so much things, and I never really understood why studios didn't capitalize on that more. Like if they developed all these nice softwares, well, obviously some studios have, as we know, Nuke and other softwares as well that came from DD, but. It's fascinating because this is not just one software. It's like an entire pipeline. You have Manuka, you have Gazebo, you have Loki, you have Kudo, Barbershop. Like they basically picked their entire thing, put it on a box, and are now putting it into their engine, which is really fascinating. It's an entire pipeline that took like decades of development, and now it's going to be like public, which is I think it's fantastic. I really think it's fantastic because it's going to bring in more competition into Autodesk. It's going to bring in more competition to Foundry. Going to bring broad competition to Unreal. Competition is a lovely thing, and I love that now artists will have access to these tools, which were locked at Weta.
Do you feel like it's more than just the tools, though? It's that Unity possibly was feeling a bit behind in terms of its filmmaking aspirations compared to how Unreal had jumped into it? I'm not criticizing Unity here in any way.
It's a really good question. Yeah. I mean, so, you can imagine that, like, I've been reading, social media. We've had people like talking about this internally. I think there's more to it than that. I really think what Unity is trying to achieve overall is to get, like, they really want to get a unique angle on how people who create 3D content, like how they can have less friction. Making 3D content today is honestly still really hard, even with Unreal being free and tools being more and more available. Like, you still need a lot of skill, and you still need a lot of things. And on the other end of the spectrum, there's people making tons of money with Roblox t-shirts and all this stuff, and memes on YouTube, and create, there's this huge gap in the middle that I think is gonna happen. And I think Unity sees a sweet spot somewhere between like delivering things in the cloud, bringing more competency for like what high-end tools look like, and having their existing reach as a game engine provider. But I don't think it's about film. I think it's about 3D generally. And I really think democratizing 3D is the bigger picture here.
Yeah.
And it's easy for us to get locked into kind of the film side, especially with all the noise around virtual production stuff. But if you really think large about 3D, really film is just like a small side of it that we're super concerned with. But I think it's bigger than that.
That's why when you watch the videos and their announcements, there's always the metaverse mentioned. There's always content creation mentioned. They are really diversifying and trying to, because to be honest, like they won't really get a lot of profitability just from visual effects alone. You know, that's a really niche and small thing. That's the thing. You know, it's really tiny.
I totally agree. I always feel though that sometimes Hollywood and the film stuff and virtual production brings this, I'm going to say kudos. It's not kudos. It's kind of like it brings this Hollywoodness to it. Yeah. And you're right, Hugo, it is niche. But it just feels like sometimes when they can boast that they're part of some sort of bigger film side or virtual production side.
You can imagine how awkward it was for me when I walked into Digital Domain and somebody wanted me to sign an Assassin's Creed, right? Because I was like, this is upside down land. Like you film people caring about my stupid video game. Freaking domain, you know.
But this happens a lot. You saw that like their marketing of this merger. It's all over with footage of all the Oscar-winning films that they've made in the past.
Exactly.
So it's like it's all about showing the Lord of the Rings and showing all. And they even showed films that most likely haven't even used some of these latest tools that they even developed. So it's all about. It's like Ian says. It's the mojo. It's like the, oh my God, it's Hollywood. Hollywood's coming to town.
Prestige, maybe.
Prestige, maybe like that. Yeah, you're right. Anyway, like I did, I guess now that we've talked so much about the games engines and everything, I guess maybe let's just like talk a bit about the role in the Foundry as well and what you've been up to. I know you're still like talking about those steps, but which kind of leads into what you're doing right now, which has a lot to do with Unreal, Why don't you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So by means of a series of steps, I ended up at Foundry working on a cloud product, it turns out, which we discontinued. But what was really cool is it was a product that was launched into a completely new space for us, where we didn't really, we just had a hunch and some really great tech. But after we closed that down, we had a lot of questioning about what we were doing with our research projects. And we had, Foundry previously had been under like a private equity, several private equity ownerships. And there was a really big grind on, like, it was hard on research, right? Like, how do you justify spending money on research when, you're ultimately measured on how you're growing revenue? But when we got acquired a couple of years ago by a company called Roper, who are really great. They're almost like a technology holding company, and they have like a portfolio, and they really believe in like organic growth and defending your boundaries. And that's when my CEO Jody Madden said, listen, there's this we want to invest in research, and we want to do it in a way that helps to drive product, but we want to do this in a really sustainable way, because now we have the benefit of not having private equity breathing down our neck every year. So we want to do this in the right way, and we can basically write our own way of evolving things. So that's when I came in. I started working with Dan Ring, who's our head of research, built a great relationship. And within the first year, that's when this virtual production stuff hit, right? Like, Unreal Engine is something familiar with me since, I was in my early 20s. And now suddenly everyone's talking about it, right?
It was so weird.
I'm the Thundercats guy, and everyone's talking about doing movies with game engines, right? I'm like, cool, it's 2008 again. And of course, it's not a coincidence, right? With Kim and Mark Petit, these are great minds who are working on really, really big macro projects. And I wonder sometimes whether they, if they deliberately they're thinking this long term, because it's pretty incredible how they're pushing these big trends. So what happened that year was we went into essentially like a really confused stage. We're like, holy cow, like everything hit really hard. I don't know if you guys remember the first year with The Mandalorian, where Epic and virtual production LED screens were everywhere, and at that time, ILM was already, replacing Unreal Engine with Helios as their virtual production, but everyone was talking about Mandalorian and Unreal, right? It was all over the place. And everyone was looking at myself and Dan Ring saying, like, what are we going to do, right? Like, research guys, like, what do we do with virtual production? And what we ended up doing was there was an engineer in our real-time team by the name of Rebecca Sittermom, and we talk about this new feature that we're releasing in the next version of Nuke called Unreal Reader. She was the mastermind behind it, and she had experience developing things in Unreal. And she's like, "Look, I made this thing, and it basically connects to Unreal Engine over a TCP/IP port, and it asks the movie render queue, which generates like high quality frames." And I pulled them into this thing that behaves like a read node. And we were all looking like, hey, that's actually kind of cool. Or like, well, hold on, like, let's figure out like, how can we polish this up? How do we test this? So essentially I constructed, it was pretty much like an 8-month alpha testing plan where we rolled it out, I think at first to like 5 or 6 customers, and then like a dozen, and a couple dozen. And we just interacted with them really, really quickly. A bunch of people took this thing and put it into production right away, even though it was totally not ready for showtime. We gave them beta builds, and like we, do Zoom calls with them. We did this Foundry Live presentation where we tried to introduce some of their stuff to the world. They were doing things like virtual production shoots, where like, how do I clean up the moire? How do I do set extensions? How do, like re-rendering stuff with Unreal in a way where I could bring it into Nuke and work with it was kind of the recurring theme. And we realized we had this kind of cool thing on our hands where it was sort of marrying that sort of final pixel quality that Nuke was really great at achieving, and the ability for using Unreal as sort of the earlier stage of the pipeline where you're just getting stuff out to the LED screen, and you're just getting it in real time, and it's like kind of good enough for on set. And then like, how do I do kind of on set post production, and then like real post production. So now it's a thing. It's a great feature. If you guys haven't seen it, stay tuned over the next couple of weeks when we launch Nuke 13.1. We'll be talking about the feature. You'll be able to go to the Unreal Marketplace in a few weeks as well and download the plugin. And it's really cool. It's a great way of just moving renders from Unreal Engine, bringing them into Nuke, and working with them in a compositor-friendly workflow.
Yeah. And it's
go ahead, Hugo.
It's really funny that you're saying that about the pixel perfect and everything, because we've talked, me and Ian talked a lot about Unreal on this show. I think it's probably the most talked topic of the show, most likely. And it's normal because it's like, as soon as Mandalorian happened, and as soon as like the all these things happen, there was like a torrent of videos on YouTube of people saying, "Oh my God, compositing is dead. Oh my God, visual effects is never gonna be the same. Oh my God, this. Oh my God, that." And it's just a lot of "oh my God" videos with a lot of really stupid reaction thumbnails and everything. And the funny thing is, now that the dust has settled, we can kind of start seeing some of the issues and problems also that come from just using an Unreal Engine, where high quality is not really the objective. The objective is performance, because the engine is supposed to be for 60 frames per second to play any game that would be at that stage. So I really find it fascinating, this plugin. I've tried it, I've tested it, and I think you guys are really on to something. And I guess I just wanted you to like maybe talk a bit about some of the features that we have in the plugin, because the plugin, for me, in my opinion, is really, well, not a plugin, it's a tool, sorry. The tool is really kind of closing that gap between, you have a render in Unreal which looks good if you have an untrained eye, or if you're looking really quick, or if you're just glancing at it, maybe it looks fine. But then if you go really deep into it, you start to see some of the problems, edge problems, depth of field problems. You start seeing some of the artifacts of the antilization, the artifacts of the SSA, all those, the reconstruction 4K, all those little artifacts that you start to see, which is basically Unreal's engine trying to cut corners to try to have that performance up and running at 60 or at 30, and depending on the project. So I think it's fascinating, because you guys are taking a different approach. You're basically trying to pick up Unreal and somehow tame it into an AOV pipeline, where you have passes and you have cryptomats and like that. So why don't you explain to the audience a bit of that, about a bit how that works? Because I know I've tested it and I've seen some of the tutorials, some of the videos. it's quite robust, but it doesn't, of course, have all the AUVs that normally you have on an engine, right? So why don't you tell us a little bit about that, Matt?
Yeah. So indeed, the idea behind Unreal Reader is to give a compositor-friendly workflow. Ultimately, the tool is kind of limited by what the Unreal Engine can produce.
Yeah.
There's limitations that are intrinsic to how the Unreal renderer is engineered in order to achieve the constraints that it needs to hit as a real-time game engine. Using things like deferred rendering and just the lighting techniques and things like that, or the way I think it's going to be even trickier with Unreal 5 with Lumen, where lighting, for example, is amortized over multiple frames. Even in Unreal 4, things like motion blur are not frame stable, but it looks really great for a game console. So within those constraints, you can pull in really high resolution passes. You get all the ones that are available from the movie render queue. You can think of Unreal Reader essentially as like a Nuke cockpit for the movie render queue to be able to kind of fly it wherever you want. And we add all sorts. But for me, the really cool part about it, if it was just that, it would be sort of like, all right, cool, that's nifty. But we added all these really nice things that I think are quite important. Like, for example, stencil layers and being able to slice the scene is really important. And then on top of that, the ability to override the render camera and be able to pull the camera from your Unreal sequence and see it inside of Nuke are really great too, because that lets you manipulate framing and really make all sorts of great adjustments. We have the ability to generate cube maps and point clouds. Those are really useful things as well to help you do like relighting. But I think even bigger than the tools around Unreal itself, I think is how it fits into the context of an overall compositing workflow beyond just using 3D. Right, like Unreal is really great for 3D, but the minute you have plates or cards or projection maps and stuff like that, integrating that with a game engine is not there isn't a well-established practice for that. Like virtual production today is very messy. It's not just LED walls, and it's not just pre-production in 3D with game engines, and it's not just in-camera VFX. It's the use of game engine technology mixed into traditional production methodologies, and the shape of that mix is I've yet to see anything stabilize around that. Every virtual production that I've interacted with has been completely different and unique in the way they approach it, and they hit different problems. And I think what's really cool about Unreal Reader is, anywhere we're using Unreal and you're working with traditional techniques, it potentially has a really interesting place. And Nuke's kind of the place where you kind of assemble everything together and work with those things. So it's great to be able to work with Unreal almost as like it's generating AOVs, but beyond that, the way it integrates with your overall other sources of visual imagery, and the ability to kind of peel them off and integrate them and finesse them, I think is the really interesting aspect. And it's impossible to do that with just a game engine today or just in-camera VFX today, because that's only one part of the equation. I think people are looking at virtual production is a much wider portfolio of techniques. And I don't necessarily see that going away. That's why all those reaction videos of like compositing dead and everything. I think that might be true for a very, very limited set of things, but all the interesting stuff happening with virtual production today, to me, is more about how game engines are complementing and adding to processes versus how they're going and, taking, the horses behind the barn and shooting them. There's no horses being, taken away. There's just, everybody's just being able to do more stuff. But how do you glue it all together, and how do you bring it all together in a way that's repeatable and makes sense to the pipeline, supervisors, the artists? That's what we're really hoping that we're able to build tools around, and that was kind of our guiding light for the Unreal Reader.
Matt, what's some of the, if you're allowed to talk about it, what's some of the fun things you might have already seen customers experimenting with Unreal Reader? Or you yourself, what are some of the actual outcomes or projects that you see it being used at or have already seen?
Yeah, we talked about a couple of those at Foundry Live. I mean, I really liked one that Pixelmondo did, where they use subtractive rendering to sort of build traditional AOVs out of Unreal Engine. I thought that was cute because I think it's a great hint to Epic that, maybe like instead of making graphics just like faster and fancier, they should add that extra layer where you can actually create AOVs that are useful at the end of the pipeline versus, at the time where you would see in 60 frames a second. We did a project internally recently that we're going to talk about at Real-Time Conference, which we're really excited about, where we combined our machine learning tool, Copycat, with in-camera VFX and Unreal Reader, without giving away everything, but the ability to re-render backgrounds that have LED walls in them, and basically get clean plates of them, and within seconds of a shot finishing, getting essentially reviewable level results. That type of thing is really powerful. The idea that like, your main character, if you're Thor and you're holding this green stick and okay, pretend that's your hammer, right? And then you wait 6 months to actually see what that looks like. That's really lame. It's like trying to trying to decorate a room by turning off the light, moving stuff around in the dark and turning the light on again, doing it over and over. Nobody wants to work that way. The ability to get like better quality on the spot is really powerful. And I think being able to go and like, get stuff out of Unreal really quickly and bringing it into Nuke without having to say like, okay, I'm going to go bid that shot and wait months for it to come back. Like, no, there's going to be VFX done on set, and the lines between, production and post-production are blurring. And I think that's a really great thing. We just have to be able to build the tools and the workflows that, make that practical and meet all of the really tough problems that people have more in the on-set world. That's not traditionally our strong suit at Foundry, right? Is the on-set world. But that's really where we see a lot of interesting potential. And that's why we're spending a lot of time doing, working with virtual productions, being on set. And yeah, we're really, really interested in that. And I think that's where some of the that's where some of the coolest projects around this stuff are happening.
Awesome. I have sort of another perspective on this, which is you sort of mentioned it when you were working at Foundry and Mandalorian hit, and there's this buzz factor. And I feel like sometimes the visual effects industry goes up and down like this in terms of interest and buzz and success and all that sort of thing. I remember there was this time, like, maybe 5 years ago, a decade ago, where we just felt like digital humans had been solved. Digital CG water sims had been solved. I have to say right now with the virtual production change and real-time change in terms of filmmaking, and here's the thing, a lot of game makers are like, yeah, we were doing that 20 years ago, blah, blah, blah. And I don't mean, Matt, you saying that, but I actually feel like you've kind of said, there's this whole renewed interest in it, and it's driving so much amazing development. We're going to look back at this time and go, wow, we really powered on, didn't we, during this time? Do you think that's true, Matt?
Yeah, I like the exuberance. I think, does it border on hysteria? Like, I think that's a little pessimistic. I don't know if you've ever seen kind of the Gartner hype curve or whatever, right? Where you reach the peak of inflated expectations and then, you reach the plateau of productivity. I think we're very close to the peak of inflated expectations around virtual production, real-time game engines, and we're gonna reach the plateau of productivity over the next couple of years. I think that's completely natural. That's not a failure or a lack of success at all. I think that's the natural way that people master a new technology, and I really look forward to that, because I think at the end of the day, where we things are actually useful to the largest number of people isn't necessarily when they're brand new and only a small number of companies can afford to create them. That's the tough challenges are getting everything to be in as part of everyday use. So that's what actually excites me. Having said that, I get bored with things really easily. If you haven't noticed, I couldn't even finish the story of my career. I think by the time, virtual production is something that we're like, oh yeah, you remember when that was all, hysteria, we'll probably be working on something else. But
on the next thing. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, but it's funny that you're saying that, because it's It is like that, isn't it? Because we're now seeing the potential. We're seeing all of this, and I see a future where I really want to focus on doing 3D, just like if I was on set. I would just move around flags and move around lights and move around and frame an angle or switch a lens and basically just have everything interactively change automatically. That's always been the dream. As CG artists and as visual effects artists, we've always dreamed at that time that we didn't need to wait for the render time, which is funny because it's exactly what we've experienced on set when we were filming. Because when you're filming, you have a real set there. Of course, obviously, someone built the set for weeks, of course. But when you have the set there, it's a real set. It has real walls. It has real lights bouncing. Everything is like reality. And then, of course, you put some fake lights. You put some fake flags, and you then experiment with lenses. But the creative process of being on set, of trying lenses, of trying different angles, or even when you're outside, when you're in the street, and you experiment a bit with just different problems that occur on set, it's kind of like getting transferred to CG, which is amazing because I've always felt that the CG pipeline is like too sterile, like you're basically waiting too long. It's like you come up with a concept art, then you're gonna go into modeling, and then from modeling go to texturing, then you go, like, by the time you watch the scene, you don't even remember what you were doing, like it's almost like, oh, was that what I said I wanted? Oh, I don't like it. And that's, I think, why we have all these problems with clients and reactions and feedback, because our mind works like that. After 5 days or 6 days, we have other ideas and have other thoughts. So I think this entire technology, in my view, is really going to shift the creative pipeline. It's going to really change the way we work completely. It's going to take a while. It's going to take a long time. But I'm really looking forward. I'm really positive, and I'm really optimistic about that. I feel like we're going to have. It's like Ian says, like in 10 years from now, it's going to be just normal, completely normal, and that's really exciting,
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's more than even just the process of CG or 3D as well. I think what's really great about virtual production is you can integrate all sorts of traditional film techniques. You can what you put on the LED wall could be something you shot and you're playing it back. What's really good about LED walls is that you get that lighting, you get the really, it looks very natural. The way people fit into the environment is just so much more natural. It's not this magic wand that suddenly will have 100% photorealistic 3D environments everywhere in real time, and no one will need to actually go and photograph anything anymore. I think there'll be a combination of a lot of different techniques. I think game engines are great. They have a place, but where I don't think I think where it turns into hysteria around virtual production is saying things like compositing is dead.
Yeah.
You don't need like fundamentals of like photography or lighting or those things. I think that will remain. Having said that, where the digital process has been transformative and is still still in the process of fully completing itself is exactly that, is making everything turn around a lot faster and giving feedback to people and letting you change your mind and just accelerating that flow. So that's a good thing.
Well, I mean, there are still a lot of problems and a lot of things that are still kind of like there that don't really allow you to really do a seamless virtual production looking as real as if you were outside, for several reasons. The light is still not enough for some of the panels. You still have to deal with Moe effect. We still have to deal with the seams of the panels. There's still a lot of problems that a lot of people much smarter than me are trying to solve, and I'm sure they will solve most of them. But I still think also that some productions will be like that and others will still be outside and still be normal. And that's where I don't really like this extremist conversation. I don't like the way people say, oh, yeah, we never need to go outside anymore. Well, I mean, you should still go outside if it's easier or if it's simpler, because as much as people love virtual production, it is an expensive process. You have to have an entire set, dozens of screens, computers, render power. You need to do all the CG beforehand. There's all sorts of things that make it quite expensive that sometimes just going around the street will be cheaper. So sometimes I think people I think most people that have those conversations probably never been on set, and I think that's why they probably think it can just be replaced like that. So I feel like we'll have these two things seamlessly. I imagine a future where we have a film where, okay, these 10 shots will be done on an LED screen because we have a car and we have this and that. And then we have these 15 shots, which will be on a real house. And then we have now these 10 shots, which will be on a green screen. And we have these 5 shots, which will be on a street. And I think that's what's going to happen. We're going to have a mix of mediums on the production,
Because it's interesting, Mandalorian did do that.
Yeah,
they
I know.
absolutely, of course, do huge virtual production environments on their stagecraft stage, but then they'll go out to the desert or some shooting place and have a real environment. So it's funny that we always correlate it with the LED stage, but they are shooting.
Yeah, well,
scenes,
but I think that's just misunderstanding of people on the pipeline. It's like the other day I saw people on Twitter looking at some of the behind the scenes of Dune, and they saw this kind of like brown backgrounds instead of green screens, and they look at that, and they were commenting, oh, why didn't they just go to a virtual production set? Why didn't you just do that? Well, I mean, it's a desert, and it's probably just easier to just film 2 people walking on the sand than actually having the sand in a stage, because then you have to bring the sand into the stage because the feet need to interact. So then we're talking about building an entire sandbox on stage and then put the LEDs next to it. It's probably going to be more hard. It's probably going to be more difficult, So I think that's the extreme opinions. I think that is the issue. But I think the people working in the productions, they're not doing that. Like, productions are being done with a mixture. It's just that the Twitters and also the React videos and also like all the people are always just looking at that side. It's like you said, Ian. Like, the Mandalorian was using multiple mixed mediums, but everyone just talked about the LED walls. No one talked about the green screen or talking about filming outside, I find it interesting how that's going on, the misunderstanding of how this entire thing works.
Agree.
Yeah.
Matt and Hugo, it's been so fascinating talking about this stuff. I'm excited that Foundry's doing more in the virtual production real-time side and Unreal side. Matt, you sort of mentioned that Unreal Reader is coming out with 13.1, is that right? Just wanted to give a heads up to people about where to expect it.
Yeah, that's correct. Check out Nuke 13.1 when it comes out. Lots of great stuff in that release, by the way. It's not just Unreal Reader. Really great stuff in terms of like USD, OpenColor, 3D interaction systems being improved a lot. The list is really, really long in terms of
what you're gonna have Hydra on the Mac finally.
Yeah. Oh yeah, the Hydra stuff. Yeah. Really, really cool. I'd have to say honestly, like this is one of the most I don't know why it's a point release, because it's really big.
Yeah, it's like 14. Yeah, it is. It's big. It's huge. I've been on the beta, and it's like a 14.0 almost. It is very complete for sure.
Yeah, so lots of great stuff in there, and yeah, if you're into checking out Unreal Reader and if you're into Unreal and all this great stuff, and you have Nuke or you want to check out Nuke, why not both? It's a great tool to have under your belt.
Awesome. Well, I think we should wrap it up there, Matt. I really enjoyed going down that history road, especially hearing about Softimage and then Thundercats. I mean, what a special treat. Thank you for taking the time to talk to us and being on VFX Notes. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks, Ian, and thanks, Hugo. It's a great pleasure talking to both of you.
No problem.
Awesome. See you later. Bye.
Bye.